In 2016, 36 people were killed when a fire broke out in a warehouse which was hosting an illegal rave. This notorious event in the electronic music community is titled the Ghost Ship Fire. A rave is an underground dance music party which almost by definition happens illegally. However, this standardized definition kind of undercuts the large cultural part because for a lot of us, myself included, it's really about the community and the music. Having a group of like-minded people who like the same things as you. It's the same feeling you probably get from your hockey team or your book club or Comic-Con. We just love getting together and celebrating this thing that we love. But let's backtrack for a moment. How did you feel when that music was playing earlier? Did you identify with this atmosphere? Did you maybe have stigmas? Let's unpack all this by going back to where it all began. So, electronic music was born out of the ashes of disco, but not popularized disco. We're talking queer, Black, underground resistance, just as it has been before it was taken up by the mainstream. And because of the way it was appropriated by popular culture, when electronic music was born out of the ashes of disco, it amplified all those parts of it that the mainstream had most criticized. So the machinic repetition, the hypersexualized lyrics, and frankly, the druggy hedonism. But the point for these people wasn't inherently resistance. It was community. See, discotheques had started to emerge in New York shortly after the Stonewall Inn raids and riots, which, if you're unfamiliar, marked a pivotal moment for LGBTQ rights in North America. Essentially, the NYPD had been raiding bathhouses, which were social hubs for gay culture at the time. And eventually, enough was enough, and a raid became a riot. After this, there was a very tense peace between queer people in New York and the police officers there. And when disco was reborn as electronic music, those discotheques were turned into dance clubs. Unfortunately, however, due to its anti-authoritarian positioning, it was viewed as a site of resistance and accordingly became policed. So in New York in particular, there's a set of municipal bylaws titled the Cabaret Laws, which have been in place since 1926 and were actually originally used to deter interracial dancing in jazz clubs. Although the Cabaret Laws were formally struck down in 2017, a lot of the barriers that they created still stand, particularly around zoning. Over the last 100 years or so, they've taken many different forms. So at one point, no more than 3 musicians could perform in a club. At another, every performer in New York had to acquire a cabaret card, which required fingerprinting and background checks. And fun fact, Frank Sinatra, you might have heard of him. He made a little song called New York, New York Famous. He wouldn't perform in New York for years because he didn't want to submit to the indignity of the process. And he actually played a pretty huge part in overturning that law. But the most recent manifestation of the Cabaret Laws, and the one that gets used against electronic music parties the most, is the prohibition on social dancing, which is defined as 3 or more people moving together to a rhythm. Yeah, can you imagine how many people have illegally danced in New York over the last century? The Cabaret Laws have been forced arbitrarily over the course of the last 100 years, and particularly have worked to force electronic music parties out of popular upper-class neighborhoods to move them into more unsafe spaces, like warehouses, just like the site of the Ghost Ship Fire, which is a lot more unsafe for its participants. Municipal bylaws, the Cabaret Laws and beyond, essentially are used to regulate taste and determine what behaviors belong in what areas. So in the past, criminal law had been used to regulate taste, but more and more we focus criminal law on whether or not it actually causes harm. So what do we do when criminal law can no longer regulate taste? Well, in steps municipal bylaws to pick up where it left off. So, for example, in our city, and most cities have a bylaw like this in fact, you are not allowed to have untrimmed grass or weeds in your yard if it's deemed excessive in comparison to your neighbors. This means that the people who have the good taste to keep their yards regulated stay in certain neighborhoods, while those who don't are either forced to change or they're kicked out of that likely upper-class neighborhood. These bylaws are often written in such a way that they can be discerned by a reasonable person. But who is this reasonable person exactly? A According to Mariana Valverde, a criminologist at University of Toronto who studies city governance, the reasonable person test is often written in such a way as to be conservative and ensure that the people with power are the ones who get to regulate taste. Accordingly, communities that are in the margins continue to be marginalized, while the status quo is upheld. For electronic music, this almost always means noise bylaws, and the noise bylaw for our city is posted here. So first of all, a few notes on decibel readers. They take a lot of training, and that training requires a financial commitment on the part of the police department. Further, they're really subjective. So depending on how far away you are from the sound, or even the quality of the sound, whether it has more treble or bass, you're going to get drastically different readings. So for this reason, they're almost never used. Further, who here has an electric guitar plugged into an amp at home that's been charged with a noise violation? Probably no one, right? So we can see how evidently arbitrary these bylaws are, given that apparently no one's allowed to use an amplifier in St. John's. Most importantly, according to Valverde, is that these noise complaints aren't actually investigated and evaluated based on the validity of the complaint, but based on the profile of who's complaining. So the map we have posted here is the Cabaret Laws, and the areas in blue are where you're actually allowed to participate in social dancing in New York. So what we can see is that there are designated neighborhoods where you are definitively allowed to participate in social dancing, and others where it's totally off limits. What this means is that there's a hierarchy of citizenship, not just between electronic music patrons and the people who are going to make complaints about them, but also between the different groups of people who are eligible to make complaints. What this means is that the comfort of the wealthy elite comes at the cost of the safety of the marginalized. So the faces you see here are the lives who were lost in the ghost ship fire. Do they look particularly criminal or malicious to you? One of the things that we lose sight of when we talk about these supposed electronic music hooligans is the fact that they are all someone's children. And because there is such a strong correlation between youth and electronic music, that could have been your kid. This didn't have to happen. These lives didn't have to be lost, but much like in New York with the Cabaret Laws, these parties globally, all over the world, in every city, are policed out of safe venues and pushed into more dangerous ones. It is a pattern. It happened in New York, it happened in California with the ghost ship fire, and it happens here. And for the safety of my community and the people that I care about on a local and an international level, something needs to change. So one of the big issues we take with the statement that electronic music is bad taste is that it's primarily founded in these outdated homophobic, transphobic, and racist sentiments. And while these sentiments are not totally eradicated in our broader society, we owe it to ourselves as a group of people who value innovation and diversity to question those small invisible prejudices when we find them lurking in the back of our subconscious. However, making this change isn't just about making a conscious effort. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's kind of about going with the flow. Change is inevitable. True reproductions of human behaviors rarely, if ever, actually happen. And so with every micro-interaction, every word you say or sentence you speak to another human being, you change the fabric of what our society and our culture is and means. To change is at the very essence of humanity. And so while it might be scary, opening yourself up to new perspectives and experiences, it's kind of what being a human being is all about. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of inaction as action. And by this I mean recognizing that maybe if you're not involved in something, you don't have to go out of your way to police it. I did a master's degree in Socio-Legal Studies. We love pretending that the laws make us, but the reality is we co-create one another all the time. So just as much as, sure, our behaviors are structured by law, we're also the ones who write and enact and manifest those laws. So if people stop calling in noise complaints on electronic music parties, guess what? It stops having an effect. I'm not here to try and convert everyone into ravers. That's not realistic. Some of you just find the music abrasive. I get it, it's okay. Although it is awesome if some of you want to come to a party after this. What I'm trying to say is that a big thing that you can do is absolutely nothing. And I don't mean to say be apathetic, I'm just saying don't pick up the phone. Stop perpetuating the stigma, stop calling the cops on perfectly legal parties, and stop hating something that maybe you just don't fully understand. Alternatively, if you are an action-based go-getter, start with evaluating your own personal biases. Try and expose yourself to some intergenerational contexts. Ask yourself who the gatekeepers are, and if you have a voice to reach those people, start having those conversations. And of course, continue questioning laws concerning your safety and protection, particularly when you notice they're doing the exact opposite. So let's review the benefits of eliminating the stigma and normalizing electronic music parties. Fire regulations would be up to code. Minors wouldn't be admitted to parties. Venues wouldn't continue admitting patrons well past capacity due to the primary motivation of the promoter trying to make more money. Which brings me to my final point, we wouldn't be putting money into the pockets of criminals. Right now, if raves are happening illegally, they are not effectively taxed, and none of that money goes back to the city, the province, or the country. Alternatively, if they are legal, then they are taxed. So all of a sudden the money from raves is going back into schools, the military, the construction downtown, fighting global warming, and so on and so on. Right now, electronic music parties have something to contribute, and those contributions are being turned down in the form of rejection notices from venue rentals. So as a member of your local DJ collective, I've helped to promote in the state the safety initiatives listed here, as well as repurpose some very eclectic spaces to throw parties in. So this has included microbreweries, art galleries, a geology museum, a circus practice space, and I'm happy to say that the farmers market that we're actually all in now has been acquired to throw our annual Pride event. Yeah, it's cool. Took a lot of activism, but we made it, so yeah, it was good. A large part of what we have to do when we're rethinking what electronic music parties are and where they take place is ask ourselves, what spaces do we have, and how can those spaces be repurposed to serve other communities? Unfortunately, imagination is only half the battle. We need the people who own these properties to be okay with what we're doing and let us go ahead and do it. We're really not the hedonistic imps we've been made out to be. We're really just a group of people who love getting together and dancing the night away. Oh, how did that get in there? So in summary, if you care about your community, if you care about safety in your community, if you care about fostering your community rather than fighting it, then you care about electronic music and making space for electronic music.